Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to view Black Box. So, I think the biggest compliment I can go on to deliver to this film is this movie is just interesting enough to not feel like I wasted my time. And so, with that, that is the biggest compliment I can go on and give this movie. Definitely, I would give it a thumbs up. Currently, it's available on Amazon. And if not at some point, then you can go on and check out a number of new release reviews, and then you'll find a number of apps that I've kind of used over time. But considering this is on Amazon, like I figure I wouldn't go on and give any other options besides that. And so, but yeah, so definitely a thumbs up. At the end of the day, it's just another okay film. Uh, but I was like, okay, like there's something more here. Like I thought that this was just like a guy trying to get his memory back kind of film, and that's all it was going to be. As if this was going to be like regarding Henry or something like that. But it comes out the story ends up being a lot more, and it seems that Nolan, unbeknownst to him, was to get taken advantage of. And so the way of which that this kind of plays out almost plays out like the Hayden Christensen movie Awake. Uh, and I'll go on and explain that when we actually get into uh, maybe probably just spoilers. Like I'll hopefully explain why it is that I feel that way when we get to the twist of this film. So this movie, of course, is about a guy named Nolan who seems via an accident to have lost his memory. And so Nolan every day is going on and looking through videos and old photos to try to connect the dots, put things together. But then all of a sudden, we also have Nolan that is mentally getting choked for some weird, bizarre reason. And so Nolan is to go on and try to continue to remember certain people for his work, or is to go on and need to remember certain people that are to be in his daughter's life, Ava. And so Nolan is trying to remember all this stuff or keep it all together. And so it seems that Nolan is to be a photographer, and the photos of which that Nolan is to try to sell, his boss is not interested in, because obviously it seems that uh, Nolan's boss is to have liked his older style, and so what Nolan is trying to do now is to be just a waste of time, that he will not go on and get paid for anything that he is going to try and put out now. So Nolan, it feels, is to be desperate to be his old self again, to try and pick up where he left off, because it feels that Nolan needs to remember everything as quickly as humanly possible. And so Nolan ends up going on to meet with the Dr. Brooks, or in this case, IMDb just calls her Lillian. And so Nolan seems to be going through this like hypnotic kind of procedure to try to go on and get his memory back. And at one point, he ends up going through a headset, which of course is to be called this black box. And so the further and further that Nolan is to go through these memories, the more that Nolan is to really not understand what exactly he's seeing. Possibly having Nolan feel that he cannot understand how any of these memories could actually be his, or that maybe there may be someone else that he is to have been getting these memories from. And so the more and more Nolan uncovers and unravels, the more we find out that it seems that Nolan isn't alone in this adventure, and come to find out what we legitimately do end up coming across ends up being an interesting way for this movie to at some point then finish up and play out. So, with that said, the grading of this movie does kind of fall onto interesting. So it's okay. It's an okay film. Um, like I think like this movie does stretch, but there's also just some interesting visuals here and there through this film, and so that's why I can go on and possibly praise this movie. But uh, like I wouldn't go on and like heavily just be like, meh, like it was a good film. Like it could have been worse. Because I've seen some real just crappers a lot. So this one is just passable, but at the end of the day, I think it's about time to say that it's about that time to just go into spoilers about this one. Um, so yeah, so let's go on into that double five time territory. It's about that time yet again. Just go into what is, of course, spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time you spoil this movie. So, like I was to state in the teeing up version of this review, we of course have Nolan, who in the beginning of this movie is watching this videotape and looking at these photos, trying to remember anything. And all of a sudden, once Nolan is to start to jog his memory, it seems that there are hands coming in and choking Nolan out to be very baffled and confused what's going on here. And come to find out, anytime it seems that Nolan is to start to get his memory, we all of a sudden have something that is mentally trying to choke this down or try to strain it or try to go on and prevent Nolan from getting anywhere. So Nolan is to go on and trying to take his daughter to school, as he is to always go on and have to buckle her seatbelt, as she is to always kind of lift her hands up, and then her father is to go on and seat buckle her in. But the later and later we get in this movie, the more Nolan is just like, how about you just buckle your seat back in? Or like he ends up kind of complaining, it's like, aren't you a little old for me to continue to still do that? And so on and so forth. So Nolan then goes on to need to learn about his own boss because he's trying to have to consistently get a memory going. Like I thought that this was gonna be like one of those kind of like 50 First Dates or like Memento, where you would have like the character needing to remember everything, because of course we go into the house and like everything is labeled in the house. So I thought, I was like, oh, okay, so is this like the Joseph Gordon-Levitt thing where uh where Joseph Gordon-Levitt had worked at this bank as this janitor, and the bank ends up getting robbed, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character like doesn't have a really good memory, and so at some point he has to go on and figure out where he had buried uh, the money. Like I don't remember what exactly movie it was called, but it was like but it had Joseph Gordon-Levitt in it, and it was a really interesting story. If you probably go on and Google search Joseph Gordon-Levitt's memory loss movie, you could probably figure out what it is. But anyways, uh, and plus also I reviewed it at some point in this channel, so probably thumb through the channel and you can probably find it also. But anyways, so Nolan is to after dropping off his daughter, he then goes off to work, where we have Nolan who's trying to go on and sell these photos, I'm assuming for freelance, and his boss is to go on and hug Nolan because it's like, well, hey, like we don't shake hands here. Like, come on, Nolan, bring it in. So Nolan is to be talking to his boss, and so come to find out, his bosses say it's like, I'm sorry, but your new style, like the way you're doing this, just doesn't work anymore, or doesn't work for us. Like we like your older style, like the new thing that you're trying to do just isn't working. So really, because I don't think we have Nolan who really knows what he's doing or really knows his passion for why he's even doing this kind of job. So he's just doing it to doing it, and or doing it to doing it. He's just doing it just so he can get money, and that's all. There's no passion behind it, and so that's obviously the pictures that are being presented. So Nolan doesn't realize that this job is not going to pan out, and so Nolan then goes on to meet up with Gary, who seems to be working in this doctor capacity, or is working at this hospital. So Nolan and Gary, of course, are just kind of talking about their life and how Nolan had gotten so frustrated uh, that he ended up punching this wall because he ends up getting consistent calls for bill collectors. Yeah, man, does that suck, right? Especially, man, if you get behind one day for a bill, they call you every single day until you can get that money together, because that's all that matters, right? But not only that, that ends up leading your phone to go into the robocalls, where it's all of a sudden you have 5 times a day where it's just, hey, this is a scam likely call. And man, is that great. And you can't get it to stop either. But anyways, where, right? Crimea River. But so Nolan is to go on and complain about his struggles, and so Nolan is to talk to Gary about well, man, we should I need to come up with some way to get this memory going a lot faster. Is there any way that I can go on and figure something out? Because my daughter needs me. My daughter needs me to be 100%. And so Gary is to state it's well, maybe we should finally agree to do Dr. Lillian's procedure, Dr. Brooks's procedure. So Nolan goes into Lillian's office, and so Lillian is to perform this hypnosis on Nolan to have him kind of stare at this plus sign, and the further and further he's going on and going into looking at the sign, we then have his eyes getting heavier and heavier. So Nolan then is to be under, and it seems that Nolan is to go on and start hearing things, and then he starts to feel like he is to see things, and so on and so forth. So when Nolan is to be grabbed by this hand and yanked, all of a sudden Nolan is to be back with Lillian, and Lillian is man, normally anybody who would go under that would have these kind of brain issues, their brain wouldn't be half as what you are. Your brain is active, which is unusual. And so Lillian is saying I would definitely go on and take you as a client to go and do this whole black box procedure, because it seems that you're going to make progress leaps and bounds compared to everyone else. So Nolan is okay, this sounds great. So Nolan, it seems, is to go home and completely forget he has to go on and pick up his daughter from school, And so it seems that Ava is to be left for so long that Ava's teacher is to bring Ava home. And so the teacher ends up going and talking to Nolan and telling him, it's like, well, hey, like I get it that you have problems, but like this is the third time that this has happened, Nolan, and like if this happens again, I'm gonna call social services and like probably get Ava to go to another home. So Nolan just realized, like, oh my god, like, yeah, I completely spaced, I forgot. Because, of course, Nolan is, to have had that whole job thing kind of really bog him down. But so, Nolan, it seems, is going under this black box procedure. And so, what ends up happening is Nolan ends up needing to go and be basically hypnotized into trying to get certain memories back, as Lillian is to go on and try to talk to Nolan and talk things out. So Nolan ends up going under, and so Nolan is to have this safe room where Lillian can go on and talk to him. And so Lillian in the in the hypnotizing like thing is to go on and give Nolan this watch so that way he can go on and adjust these memories, or have him kind of be hitting a part of this watch to have him come back to the safe room so Lillian can retrieve him. So, because Lillian, after Nolan gets out of the safe room, she can't easily contact him, as well as when he's like full on under. So, Nolan, of course, his first memory is to go into his own wedding, supposedly. And so Nolan is to see the bride, and he ends up trying to like remove uh her like kind of little see-through sheet thing, whatever it's called, that a lot of brides would go on and have like over their face so you can kind of not really see them. Uh, we have Nolan who pushes that over to try to see the bride's face, and he sees like a blurred face. And Nolan is to realize, it's like, okay, like, why is it that everyone at this wedding is all blurry? That doesn't make any sense. Then not only that, we also have Nolan that seems to be dealing with a person who is to contort their way weirdly, like doing all these snap, crackle, and pop like things to distort their body. And so this character seems to go on and try to get further and further to Nolan, to want to get to him, to want to attack him. And so Nolan is getting a little afraid about that, to the point of him deciding, like, hey, I think I should just go on and pull myself out of here so I can get out. And so Lillian, again, after this whole thing is done, she's like, wow, like, this is amazing. And so Nolan is to state that he couldn't see anyone's faces, and Lillian is like, well, yeah, like, that's the whole thing. Like, at some point, like, we're going to need to get you to start seeing faces. Like, right now, it's like, we're just trying to get you to remember anything, and you're doing really well. And at some point, like, faces is like the last thing that you're going to remember at a certain point. So Nolan is like, okay, this must be like working really well. And so Nolan, after going on to have done through this procedure, Nolan ends up taking Ava to some Chinese restaurant, because it seems that Nolan is to remember something about his past beyond just that jogging of the memory from that wedding. Nolan, it seems, takes Ava to this restaurant because Nolan is to have this stick, and he starts twisting it around in his hand, and then Nolan is all of a sudden reminded about this Chinese restaurant, and so both Ava and Ava and Nolan go to this restaurant because it seems that at some point, Nolan and his wife, of course, were to go there, and Ava, I guess, was like 3 at the time. So both Nolan and Ava are eating this food and they're enjoying it. So Nolan's like, yeah, like I'm starting to get my memory back and it's great. So Nolan goes in again to go through the procedure. And so the next memory that he goes on to have is in some apartment complex. And now Nolan is really confused because he's like, wait a minute, like, this doesn't make any sense because I don't remember ever living in this apartment complex. So Nolan is to go on and see his wife, and his wife is to have some bruise on her arm. And Nolan's like, okay, like I don't ever remember like hitting my wife or bruising her. Maybe she got that by an accident or something. So Nolan, after this memory is done with, and we still have Lillian, who's like, well, hey, did you see anybody's faces? And Nolan's like, nope, not yet. So it's like, well, we have to build up to that. We have to get there. So after Nolan is done with this session, Nolan goes on to pick up his daughter, and Nolan is to want to have him and Ava just go on this little adventure, this little road trip, because it seems that Nolan is to realize that roads are starting to look a little bit more familiar. So Nolan continues to go into this direction to find this apartment complex, and he ends up finding that same exact room, or that same exact apartment complex or apartment that he used to live, and he ends up seeing these 2 people in here, and he's like, well, okay, like this doesn't make sense to me still. So we have Ava that is kind of ticked off because it's like, well, hey, like I'm hungry, and so Ava is to always be fixing the meals, and because Nolan can't for whatever reason. So we have Nolan who goes on into, of course, the next procedure, and so we also have Nolan who is to ask Gary. It's like, well, uh, like, do you ever remember me ever like striking my wife? And Gary's like, no, like, no, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like, if anything, like your wife would have ever told me if you would ever like hit her, and so none of that really makes sense. So Nolan is to have Gary write down this address and kind of look into it, and so he does. And when Gary looks into it, he's just kind of like, okay, like there seems to really be nothing like here that kind of is to connect in Gary's brain. So but somehow Nolan is to remember this apartment complex that he's never been into, and for whatever goofy reason. So now we go into this black box procedure, and Lillian this time around is really pressuring Nolan, like, hey, this time, really, we gotta focus, face. We're gonna have to stay here as long as we can possibly stand to stay here until you get a face. You need to do that now. So Nolan goes on to these two memories. Of course, him being in this apartment complex and him being at this wedding. And so he's trying to get his memory jogged. He's trying to get a face that will work. So Nolan, of course, is trying to get the face of his bride in the wedding, and we again have this contortionist that is further and further making it closer to Nolan, to the point of Nolan to end up getting knocked out, to where he can't go on and get the face in time. So Nolan, of course, is trying to get the face in the memory of the apartment complex, and we again have the contortionist that is coming out of the crib. And so Nolan ends up going on to hit this thing, the contortionist. And so Nolan ends up finally going on to get the face that he needs to see. And the face ends up not being of his actual wife. And so instead, it ends up being the face of the woman that, of course, was to have been at that apartment complex when Nolan was to have knocked and met this woman. And it seems that she was a stranger to Nolan. But come to find out, there's a whole reason to that, because now, after it seems finally that Nolan has gone on and started to get a face to tie to a memory, now all of a sudden the floodgates are starting to open, and we come to find out the reasoning why all of these memories don't make sense to Nolan is because we don't actually have Nolan in Nolan's brain. We also have a guy named Thomas, who is also in Nolan's brain. That it seems what had happened was we had Dr. Brooks, who had seen Nolan when he had come in, and he had his accident. And so Dr. Brooks was to realize that Nolan could go on and be brain dead, and that since this guy is going to have no real use of his body, Lillian decides to just play God, and she ends up hooking Thomas's brainwaves into Nolan's body to then hope to try to get what, of course, is to be her son back. And so Lillian's son is to be inside Nolan, and so Thomas all of a sudden is to take control completely of Nolan's body. So now this is Thomas now. And so Thomas is to go on and need an explanation from his own mother about what had happened, and so Lillian goes on and explains all of that. So Thomas is to go on and say, it's like, well, like, should I just go on and just pretend that I'm this guy and just kind of live the rest of his life? And Lillian's like, well, no, like, you need to go on and get your life back. And that means for Lillian to tell Thomas, like, well, yeah, like, you should get your wife back, you should get your kid back. Like, Ava is not really your daughter, so, like, yeah, you can just go on and, like, become a doctor again and do everything that you as Thomas were to try to do and try to accomplish. Because Bashal all of anything that Nolan is to have accomplished or done or whatever. No, like, you are getting your life back, and so, like, yeah, you go ahead and take what's yours. So we then turn around and have Thomas, who is to then try to get rid of Ava by like basically shipping her off to Gary, and Thomas is to say that he needs some time to like take a couple of days to try to figure things out. And so we then have Thomas, who goes back to his old apartment complex with his wife and his daughter. And so we then have Thomas trying to explain to his wife that he, of course, is Thomas. So, like, at first, we have Thomas that tries to say, it's like, oh, yeah, like, me and Thomas were old friends, like, we went to college together, and, like, we just kind of fell apart. And so this woman's like, oh, okay. So, Thomas is to go on and explain certain things to make it seem that Nolan did know Thomas. And so it seems it works well enough for this woman to accept Nolan in. So it seems that Thomas at one point does get up the courage to then explain to his former wife that he still lives, that he's still inside this other body. And so it seems that I think this girl's name is Miranda. I'm hoping I'm like saying that correctly. So it seems that Miranda is to not go on and accept or believe that this could really be true, or that Dr. Brooks could have gone on and done this procedure. And so, even so, with this guy, it's seeming to have certain information that would have us believe that this guy is to be this person. But then again, we then turn around and have Thomas, who is starting to realize that there are certain photos that are gone in this room. We have certain chairs and bookshelves that are gone. And so Thomas is to realize that his wife had gone on and replaced him or erased him from their life. And so Nolan is to start to get upset. And so he is to want to go on and be with his daughter, who's kind of in her room finishing up her homework. And so by the time that Thomas tries to go on and see his daughter, we have Miranda, who smacks him on the side of the head with something to knock him out. And then all of a sudden, the next thing we see is Thomas is now in front of Ava, and Thomas doesn't understand what he's doing. So this kind of feels like Jonathan in some ways, where we would start to have like certain things where it's like kind of pulling and tugging to the point of like, wait a minute, like I didn't realize that I had this time, or I didn't realize I was to be here, and this doesn't make sense. And so like kind of all the other kind of bodies swapping kind of movies eventually get that way. But anyways, so we then have Thomas running off to Lillian to need to explain why Thomas all of a sudden appeared in front of Ava. And so Lillian tries to explain it by saying to Thomas, it's like, well, maybe Ava is to somehow be your safe room, and somehow you just reset yourself to that location. And so Thomas is like, well, okay, like let's put me under because I think it's about time for me to face off against whatever this entity really is that has gone on and continued to contort its way to uh, to consistently stop me at every point here. So come to find out, Thomas goes back and he is to present his own safe room, which of course is to be his old apartment complex, with all the photos and all the places in the right places, uh, with the bookshelves and the chair and everything like that. So Thomas is to wait for this contortionist to show up, and come to find out that this contortionist is none other than Nolan himself. Which I'm like, oh yeah, like by the by the end of this, I kind of figured it out, or I realized that it's like, yeah, that's definitely going to be Nolan, and that would make all the sense in the world. We also had this one scene that I forgot about. We also had Nolan who had woken up uh, at some point when he was injured, and like there was the memory of that. Uh, but yeah, like there wasn't much to pull away from that. But anyways, there was that in this movie. But so we now have a showdown between Thomas and Nolan, and so Thomas is telling his mother to count him down because he's going to kill Nolan so that way Thomas can be the only thing left here. But so we have Gary and we have Ava that is rushing in to try and stop Dr. Brooks from doing what she's doing because it seems that Gary is to go on and figure it out. So we have Thomas starting to realize that Thomas is not a good person. That Thomas at one point had gone on to have the reason that he had died was that he had hurt his daughter and also had hurt his wife, and his wife had gone on to push him down this flight of stairs to hope to try and get rid of him. And so Thomas is to realize that, yeah, maybe like maybe I'm not the right guy for this. Maybe I'm not the right guy to have earned this or deserve this. And so Thomas instead is to kind of let himself go outside this door and go into this darkness and let Nolan leave and have all of his memories come back. And so Nolan, it seems, is to come back, and we have that shown by him and his daughter doing this secret handshake that they both know. And so Gary is to realize, it's like, well, hey, like we got him back, all right. And then Gary then turns to Lillian like, dude, your job is freaking done. You're so toast. This guy should turn around and sue this doctor for everything that she has. Because, yeah, like his life was in her hands. And so, come to find out, we then turn around and have Thomas's wife, or Miranda, who goes on to then read in the newspaper that this one Lillian was sacked because of this patient's scandal, and so Miranda is to go on and read that and be like, all right, okay. So come to find out, we have Nolan who is to go on and be happy and remember everything, and it seems that everything has come back to normal. And so we have Lillian who is having her black box equipment, and she is trying to figure out how she can go on and attach these brainwaves to this computer to trying to keep her son's brainwaves alive somehow or another. Then all of a sudden, Lillian is looking inside this equipment, and it seems that there's to be this kind of real flashing of light, and Lillian goes further and further into this equipment to be saying the words Thomas, and then that's how the movie ends. So, with that said, I think that does technically cover most of the film. But let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I forgot about, because I'm sure that there probably is. I'm sure there's a bajillion little details at some point that I had forgotten about. But there's also stuff that I kind of wanted to just kind of rush to get this all done and out there. So with that said, I'm just going to go on and get out of here so I can go on and put this out. So without a doubt, goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.